This over here is the brand new Core Ultra 9 285K from Intel, and everything's changed. Intel started the naming again because they are doing something new. Is the new actually better than the old 14900K? How does it compare to this? Well, I've got some good news and some bad news. But if you expect some gaming news, you ain't gonna get it. For the next 20 minutes, we're gonna be taking a look at this Core Ultra 9 in creative applications and whether you should upgrade as a creator. Licensing Windows is cheap and easy with whokeys.com, and if you use the code TN20, you get an extra discount. Complete the purchase, copy the key, and paste it to the activation settings. And you're all done. Also check out their Microsoft Office 19 license and use the same code TN20 for the extra discount. Check out whokeys.com in the video description below. Now I want to start with a little note to AMD. Please, can we figure out a way how we can get the Ryzen 9000 samples here and actually test them and cover them as well? I have some very good contacts at AMD, but right now, they're all ignoring me. I'm asking for the Ryzen 9000 samples, but I've been blanked. I haven't been kept up to date. I don't know if they think that they're not going to perform so well for creators and I'm gonna, skew the results somehow or shame them. I don't know what's going on. The only sample I have is the 9900X that Asus very kindly provided for me. So we're gonna have to put the Ultra 9 against the 9900X. But AMD has got something better up its sleeve. Come on AMD, let's make it happen. First, let's take a look at the specs, because here is the secret where we get the gained performance and what's actually going on. And I also found something that Intel didn't mention in any of their keynotes, and I thought, why? This is very good information. So I don't know why Intel is holding out. I'm gonna give you this, okay. So the CPUs we're gonna be comparing in this, what I managed to test is the 14900K, 285K, 7950X and 9900X. If you want to check any of these out or the Testbench, I'm going to leave the link in the description below. If we're focusing on the cores and threads, you can see that the new 285K is actually gone down in threads from 32 threads to 24 threads compared to AMD, which actually thread-wise matches up with the 9900X. Looking at the maximum P-core turbo frequency, P stands for performance and E stands for efficiency. We've actually gone down in frequency to 5.7 gigahertz. And then the P-core all-core max frequency is 5.5 gigahertz compared to the 5.6 on the 14900K. So 300 megahertz in boost, but then all-core boost only 100 megahertz. Looking at the base frequency, that has gone up actually 500 megahertz to 3.7 gigahertz. The E-core base frequency has gone up 800 megahertz to 3.2 gigahertz from 2.4, and the max turbo frequency from 4.4 to 4.6. Obviously AMD doesn't have the E-cores, they're just all performance cores and then boosting however they can, up to 5.1 gigahertz all core and 5.7 and 5.2 in single core kind of boost clocks. The max PCI generation is 5, and now we have 24 PCI lanes. I didn't hear that in the keynote, I didn't hear that on the briefing, but there's now 24 PCI lanes and there's PCI Gen 5 lanes. Previously, I believe it was 16 plus 4, but now all of them PCI Gen 5, which means you can have your GPU running 16 lanes PCI Gen 5 and now 2 M.2 SSDs that are running PCIe Gen 5 X4. Obviously, the chipset's going to provide extra, but that's a very good stats that we're not seeing there. We're not supporting DDR4 anymore, so this is the end of DDR4 on Intel platform. The L2 cache has been improved to 40 megabytes from 32, and the base and max turbo power is 125 and 250. Now there's asterisks next to it because Intel actually has 3 different power profiles: Intel Base, Intel Performance, and Intel Extreme. If you want to see that video on how all of these 3 perform and what does it actually mean, do you lose performance, do you gain performance, is it worth putting it to Extreme or not, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. That video is coming out very, very soon. In terms of iGPU, that one hasn't got a name. It's called Intel GPU, Intel Graphics. I can't find the name anywhere, whereas the previous one was called UHT 770. And now one of the most interesting things that Intel has done here is they've actually abandoned their own chip and gone to TSMC. This chip is using TSMC's 3nm N3B node and lithography. Obviously, this is a tile-based platform, so they're putting a little bit of everything together there, and I think a little bit of Intel as well, but they're sorting the main bit from TSMC, which is a little bit alarming for me. I'll tell you why. Because now TSMC provides chips for all of the competition. Apple, TSMC. Nvidia uses TSMC. They used to use Samsung as well, but lately only TSMC. AMD, TSMC. Now Intel, TSMC as well, which means that TSMC is probably going to rake their prices up and we're going to pay for it, which is not good news. Intel, please finish your fabs and start making your own chips. So it's better for us and better for you because you're going to make the money, okay? All of these CPUs are retested, and I've got to tell you about the testing platform because since the last year, we're going to retest everything in the new fashion. So the AMD Ryzen 7000, 8000, 9000 CPUs are tested on the Asus X870E motherboard. For RAM, we're using 64GB Kingston Fury Beast RGB RAM, and on the Ryzen 9000, we're using 5600 megatransfers per second. Ryzen 7000, we're using 5200 megatransfers per second because that's the official supported RAM by the manufacturer. For cooler, we're using a 360mm AIO, and to make sure that all of our heat from the CPU is taken off, we're using the Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut thermal paste, making sure that we get the ultimate performance. For the operating system, we're actually using a Gen 5 NVMe. Now, there's a few different ones out there, but the performance is very, very similar, so that doesn't matter. But for the secondary project drive, where all our benchmarks are on, and to separate actually a little bit to get the ultimate performance, we're using the Samsung 980 Pro 1TB SSD and a few different power supplies for all of them. Corsair HX1000, Deepcool BQ1000M, and Phanteks AMP 1000 watt for the Core Ultra one. Now the Core Ultra platform, we're using Gigabyte Z890 Aorus Elite X Ice motherboard, 64GB on Kingston Fury Renegade at 6400 MHz because now that's the official supported RAM for that. The cooler is the Trix Panorama 360mm one, and the SSD configurations is the same as on the previous platforms. For the Intel 12, 13, 14th gen, we're using the Asus ProArt Z790 Creator Wi-Fi motherboard, 32GB of DDR5 Kingston Fury Beast RGB, but now 5600 megatransfers per second for 14 and 13th gen, and 48 MHz for the 12th gen, which is the official supported RAM speed. The GPU is RTX 4090, and if you want to check out the Testbench setup, the link's in the description below. Now I want to start with the memory controller, because you already noticed that we're testing different speeds on different platforms. The reason for that is that with each generation of CPU upgrade, the actual base supported memory also increases, and to showcase that on our platform, we're using it to the stock limit, what they are saying. So 12th gen was 4800, 13th gen 5600, Ryzen 7000 5200, Ryzen 9000 5600, and now the Core Ultra 6400. So from the 14th gen to the Core Ultra 9, as you can see, we've gained 800 megahertz in the speed. There's an asterisk to it, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the 7950X has 5200 megatransfers per second and the 9900X 5600. I pulled this graph now from Intel's reviewer's guide because this is not something that everyone wants to say, you know, officially online. You can't find that on Intel Arc, you can't find that out there. AMD is a little bit more open about it and shows, you know, the different frequencies that when they go down to, you know, to 4 DIMMs, it is 3600 megahertz. But here what you can see is that the 6400 is only officially supported when you have 2 slots on the board and you're using a CU DIMM. So basically the CU DIMM is something new. This is not very widely available yet, and I don't have it yet. I haven't heard anything. I haven't had a single sample yet, but basically the C means that there's a little controller also on the DRAM that kind of helps to keep the frequency and navigate it and kind of do some other controller things. So basically an extra, can we call it, memory controller, which means that the official 6400 base frequency is only supported on those. I am using UDIMMs, the Kingston Fury one that you're probably using as well. Officially, they go to 5600, what they're saying there, and that's only with 2 slots. If I've got a 4-slot board, even if I've got a CU DIMMs as a creator, official support 5600. That's a little bit pants. The good news is you're kind of safe running them out of, you know, stock setting. I'm using 6400 for 64 gigabytes, 2 channels on a 4 DIMM slot board, and it's stable as anything. Not a single crash. It's been completely fine, not a single issue. But as you can see, when you've got 4 slots on the motherboard and you populate all of them, we can go down to 4400 megahertz. So now it seems like that's why there is a Threadripper platform or high-end desktop platform where we have 4-channel, 8-channel memory, and we can run all of them 6400 plus. Whereas on this prosumer platform, we're really kind of capping on the RAM speed. At the same time, I still think you're gonna get better speeds of RAM when you have 192 gigabytes installed on the Core Ultra because it's got a better memory controller. The thing is, Intel actually said that their sweet spot is 8000 plus kind of megahertz, which is a ridiculous statement. And if you remember when we tested the 8000 on the 14900K, I couldn't actually get it run stable. Yes, sure, you can overclock it and underclock it and somehow undervolt it and do that, but out of the box, it wasn't working. Go check out that video to actually see how much improvement you're getting in performance as a creator from 4800 to 8000 megahertz. Now, power draw, because that is what Intel is saying changed the most. They're saying that the new architecture uses much less power and you're basically getting the same performance at a much lower power, basically. So now the 285K actually pulls 253-ish watts from the socket when utilizing Cinebench R23, and that is Intel Extreme Profile. The 4900K when using Intel base settings also pulls 253 watts. The 7950X pulls 230 and the 9900X only 162 watts. So AMD is still using a little bit less power. Now finally the benchmarks that you have been waiting for. Cinebench R24. The 4900K is 6.7% slower in single core score and 24% slower in the multi-core score. That is not particularly impressive in single core score. Usually I'd expect, 10% plus. If you remember my previous video, Intel said about 9%. I'm not seeing that. But 24% roughly multi-core is nice. The 7950X is about 19% slower in single core score and about 16% slower in the multi-core score. 9900X is about 9.5% slower in the single core score and about 30% slower in the multi-core score, even though having the same amount of threads, which is interesting. Geekbench 6, the 4900K is only 2.3% slower in the single core score and about 6.7% slower in the multi-core score. 7950X is 8.5% slower in single and 15.9% slower in the multi-core score. The 9900X, interestingly, is about 1.9% faster, roughly 2% faster in the single core score and about 12.4% slower in the multi-core score. So that's not bad at all. The iGPU is new on the Core Ultra series now. It's the new one that is the same on all of the Ultra 9, Ultra 5s, Ultra everything. I wanted to see how much is the iGPU performance actually changed synthetically. So doing the Geekbench 6 iGPU, OpenCL and Vulkan scores, we can see that the 4900K is about 55 to 58% slower in the Vulkan and OpenCL scores. That's very interesting GPU performance upgrade. Moving on to Photoshop, and here's where things get a little bit interesting. The 4900K is 6.5% faster compared to the 285K, even though it's running lower. And if you remember, we're using slower RAM on the 14900K. The 7950X is 10% faster than the Core Ultra. This is last generation Ryzen, and AMD is about 10% faster than this new guy. And the 9900X is about 20% faster in Photoshop compared to the Core Ultra 9. That is interesting because Intel has always been better and faster for Photoshop and Lightroom as long as I can remember. But now Adobe and AMD, they've worked together somehow, then they have done something that actually utilizes and optimizes performance for AMD a lot better than on the Intel Core. As you can see, even the 4900K is slower than the 9900X and the 7950X on Photoshop, which is very, very interesting. Moving on to Lightroom Classic, and here again 4900K is faster than the 285K, about 2.7 in the overall and about 22 in the active scores. And bear in mind, the active score is single core score, where we're working with photos and just moving the faders and kind of adjusting photos and moving between different photos. That's what the Core Ultra should be faster at doing, because in Cinebench we saw the single core score was better, about 6-7%, but here we're 22% faster on the 14900K. Interesting. 7950X is about 16% slower, and 9900X 9.5% slower in overall scores. Let's take a look at video editing, because the iGPU now, let's see if it's finally helping. 14900K is about 4% slower in the extended and 5.3% slower in the standard overall scores. Now, if you look at these scores, basically not a lot has changed. The long GOP score, where we finally have the new iGPU in there, the 14900K is only 1.7% slower in the extended long GOP scores and less than 1% slower in the standard long GOP scores. That either means that it's not yet utilized on Premiere Pro, because this is Premiere Pro 24. Premiere Pro 25 is out now, but I'm actually getting slightly higher score that is on the Intel reviewer guide. So I know my chip is performing well, but it's not really impressive compared to the 14900K. The 7950X is about 12 to 15% slower in the extended and standard overall scores. And if you look at the long GOP scores, we're about 20 to 22% slower. The 9900X 18 to 20% slower in the long GOP scores, and about 12 to 15% in the standard overall scores. So it kind of looks impressive compared to the 9900X, but if you're already on the 14900K, it's not that different. One of the other things that I've noticed when looking on the iGPU, I don't know if Task Manager is exactly updated to the Core Ultra, but when looking at the iGPU specs, we don't have encoders on the iGPU. If you look at NVIDIA GPU, for example, you can see that there's two encoders, because there's two media engines on the NVIDIA RTX 4080 and above. But now the Core Ultra that has iGPU, we can only see decode and decode 1. So I'm wondering if there's encoders there as well. On the actual stats, they say they are there, but I think the Task Manager still is not updated yet to actually showcase that. But I don't know. If you know, let me know in the comment section below. Moving on to After Effects, and now the 285K is actually faster. The 14900K is 1.4% slower. Kind of a not big difference, but the multi-core score is 12.3% slower, which is quite impressive. The 7950X about 6% slower, and the 9900X about 4.5% slower. Moving on to DaVinci Resolve, and here bear in mind that the basic overall score is done with DaVinci Resolve free version, which doesn't utilize all the hardware, standard overall with the paid version, and then the extended overall with some extra codecs and extra features like AI and so on. Here we can see that the 14900K is about 1.6 to 0.4% faster in the standard and extended overall scores, which is very interesting. The long GOP score, now that makes me think that the 285K is not performing exactly well, or we're not utilizing the iGPU well enough, or there's driver issues or something, is 41% faster on the 14900K compared to the 285K. That's ridiculous. Although the interframe score is 21% slower on the 14900K, but it's interesting. The 7950X is about 0.7% slower in the standard overall, and about 2.6% slower in the extended overall scores. The Core Ultra 285K doesn't look that impressive. The 9900X is about 5.6 to 6% slower in the standard and extended overall scores. So video editing in DaVinci Resolve, if you have 7950X, you are actually right out there, and this Intel Core Ultra doesn't really give you anything extra. I do want to mention that Intel said that the Core Ultra has the new iGPU that supports certain extra codecs, the Sony XAVC codec, that is only hardware accelerated on the Intel iGPU. Now, which exact codec this is, I don't actually know. So I finally got an answer from Intel, and there's good news and bad news. The good news is that this codec support is not just actually supported on the Intel Core Ultra 200S series, but also all of the Intel iGPUs from the 11th gen. So if you're running 11900K, for example, you're going to get exactly the same codec support, which is kind of good news, right? It's not just Core Ultra 200S series. The bad news is this doesn't kind of make any new features for the Core 200S Ultra series. Moving on to Blender, and here we can see that the 14900K is actually getting beat quite a bit. In Monster, Junkshop and Classroom scenes were 14 to 30% slower. So this is now where Intel really improved its multi-core performance and the E-core, base and boost clock speeds that are quite a bit higher than previously. That really improves the multi-core performance, and we're really ripping it in the Blender. As you can see, the 7950X that has 16 cores, P-cores, and 32 threads is still getting beat about 1 to 7% depending on the workloads, which is actually quite impressive to do with lesser cores. The 9900X, which has the same amount of threads, 15 to 21% slower in these Blender benchmarks. So 3D rendering for this is very impressive. In V-Ray, the 14900K is 23% roughly slower, 7950X about 4% slower, and the 9900X about 17.8% slower. The conclusion, the good news and the bad news. Let's do the bad news first. If you are already on the Intel 12, 13, 14th gen platform, I highly recommend not upgrading right now, because if you are already on the 12th gen platform, just upgrade to 14900K, and if you want to see any of the build guides, the link in the description below to get yourself the best bang for buck, because now the 14900K is most likely even cheaper, and you can get even better performance on the 14900K, and you can even use DDR4 on the 14900K if you wanted to. In terms of beating Ryzen in some of these applications, actually it's not that impressive either. For example, in photo editing, looks like going with AMD is now a lot better idea. In Photoshop and Lightroom, the Core Ultra is not as impressive as AMD. In Premiere Pro, the Core Ultra still has an edge if you're looking for a new platform. In DaVinci Resolve, AMD is equally good, but I still have to give it for the Intel Core Ultra because of the iGPU and the better hardware acceleration in certain codecs. In 3D though, the Core Ultra looks like is a very, very good option. It performs very well and can be up to 30% faster than the 14900K while consuming less power. But now the good news. This is something completely new that Intel is doing. Now that's why they've also changed the name. It's not called 15th gen, but called Ultra 2. And why is it 200 series? It's because to actually make it match with their mobile and laptop CPUs, because the laptops already had the Ultra 100 series, and now the Ultra 200 series are already out there. Lunar Lake, I'm sure you've heard of that one before. So that's why the naming has changed, because they have laid a base for something completely different, new architecture, something that is a lot different. And what I can see, there is quite a bit of potential, because this chip is running a lot cooler than the 14900K. 14900K, basically, if you had hardware info open, it is throttling pretty much all the time because the heat spot is in one place and it doesn't work. It's always running to its, thermal limits. This guy never seen thermal throttle, like literally never. So Intel has fixed the issue of very hot chips. They are not hot anymore, and whichever 360mm cooler I've put on, they've just worked really, really well. Stay tuned for our overclocking and how much we're actually trying to make this thermal throttle over 300 watts. You'll be very surprised. Video coming out very, very soon. The improved memory controller that gives us hopefully better RAM support, that's good to know, and the more PCIe lanes and connectivity, that's all improved, as well as the iGPU. Now, the truth at this point in time is that Intel's kind of on par with AMD, depending what you do. In photo editing, AMD is better. Video editing, I'd say Intel is better. 3D, probably Intel is better. But then AMD also has their Threadripper, which is a lot better in there. So I'd say it's kind of equal right now. The only thing I would say is, if you're looking for a new platform and you're coming from very old ones, the iGPU of this one and the support for video editing, that kind of makes me excited because that's what I am using the most. But if you're doing photo editing, I hope that's clear for you. Stick with AMD. And for people who are on the 12th gen platform, for example, who were hoping that this is going to be their big upgrade now to a new platform, I'd probably say this is not your platform to upgrade to. If you're already on the 12th gen, just upgrade to the 14th gen, because now it's cheaper than ever and you're really getting the same, if not even better performance than the Core Ultra 9 on your 14th gen. Now, if you are on 11th gen, maybe, or before, then I'd say probably checking out this Core Ultra is a good idea, because the future upgrades that this supports and the new platform and then the whole new thing that also comes with it, like more PCI lanes, connectivity. If that excites you and you're on a very old platform that has limited connectivity, probably the Core Ultra is the one for you. So this was the Core Ultra 9. In terms of pricing, check out the latest in the video description below, and I'd love to know how much it costs in your region. And if you're interested in the Ultra 5, which I have been actually showing you during this video. This wasn't Core Ultra 9 because the Ultra 9 is still in the test bench. This is Ultra 5 that now goes into the test bench, and I'll start testing this one. If you want to see the review of that one, stick around, video coming out very soon. Thanks guys for watching, bye bye.